Hi there, and welcome to the Animation Industry Podcast. My name is Terry, and when I was 14 years old, I started making stop-motion animations in my bedroom using my grandpa's old camera. Ever since, I've been obsessed with everything to do with animation, and right now, I'm a student at Sheridan College. I created this podcast to connect with and learn from some of the biggest names in the industry, their best practices, the hardships they went through, and what to focus on to make it in today's changing animation world. It's my hope that by sharing this info that you too have the best chance of success. Now let's get started. In this episode, we are talking about the skills and attitude you need to make it as a story artist, and who better to share their experience than a seasoned story artist from Dreamworks Animation. That is Colin Jack. So Colin, he started his career as a freelancer before landing his first gig working on Ed, Edd, and Eddy at Cartoon Network. And since then, he's worked on nearly 24 shows and movies, including Total Drama Island, Hotel Transylvania, Captain Underpants, and Boss Baby. And if you didn't think that was enough, he's also a children's book illustrator. So, Colin, thank you for being here today. How are you doing?
Good. Sounding very impressive.
Well, you are.
So we'll disillusion them in a moment. Well, we'll tell them the truth in a moment.
All right. Well. So I always kick off these chats kind of in the same way, and that's by asking, how did you get interested in pursuing a career in animation?
That goes back to like being 9, which was a very, very, very long time ago, 30 years ago, in fact. I was watching an episode of Tiny Toons Adventures. And they were talking about the animation process. I used to love to draw, and I would draw like Bart Simpson and like Warner Brothers characters just on like my dad was a copywriter, so for radio, so he would have these like sheets of computer paper, and back then they would have like serrated edges with holes. That's like, it's old. You could probably find, you'll never be able to find this paper, but I would always flip on the back and I would draw with marker. But there was an episode where they talked about the process of animation, and I didn't realize that, oh my gosh, that's a job. And I was 9, and that was it. I was done. I knew exactly what I wanted to do, and much to the chagrin of my teachers and professors, from 4th grade on to like when I finished high school, that's all I did. And I did school. I was a pretty decent student, but I would always like try to make it into some kind of form of a cartoon. Even in writing assignments. Yeah, even like creative writing assignments that I would get, I would go, well, is there an illustration component to it? And they're like, just draw a picture, Colin. That's what makes you happy. Go ahead.
Sounds good.
So 9 was it, and then like that was kind of like I don't want to say the golden age of it, but there was still Saturday morning cartoons, like Tiny Toons, and there's Batman, the animated series, and I just devoured all of it. And then I also discovered in that obsession a thing called Animation Magazine, which I think still comes out today. But then you would see things like cells. Like you could order cells like by mail. I'm just gonna say it. I mean, for those who don't know, cells were the things that you would paint, like plastic sheets that you would paint cartoons on before the computer. So I'd order a ton of those and use like overhead projector markers to like to ink and paint my sort of really crummy animation and paint the back of it.
You were a really ambitious kid.
I was just obsessed, and it didn't go away ever from then on. So
between 9 years old and when you actually got your first gig in the animation industry, I know in our pre-chat you mentioned it wasn't the smoothest ride after you graduated. I'm wondering if you can go into a little bit of that.
That was 9, and then it was a sea of rejection, and we're still rejection. Like I just got rejected for something yesterday, which I can share as well. high school ends, and then there's a program available in Vancouver where I'm from, and it's the commercial animation program at Capilano College, now university. And it was a very, like, it's back then, and I don't know how it is now, what you had to do to like get into the course was present a portfolio of like life drawing and like like art skills, and then animal drawings, human drawings, and then like still life drawings, like just really classical art skills to get into this program. And based on the portfolio I sent in, I got rejected.
Okay.
So it was about 18, 19. So that really bummed me out, but I also needed to either go to college or go get a part-time job somewhere. So I took a fine arts course at Langara for about a year and a half, and that was fine. I learned some very basic sort of painting and drawing and stuff like that, and eventually, about a year and a half into that, I'm like, no, I gotta try it. I'm gonna try again and apply again. So I took I stopped going to art school, and I decided to just work part-time at Zellers. Is Zellers still up in Canada? Is that still a thing?
No, it's closed down.
Oh.
It went bankrupt.
Oh, really?
Yeah, years ago. So it's a piece of
So
the
yeah, I was working part-time at Zellers, and then I decided to go ahead and get my portfolio together and meet the requirements that were sort of asked of you, and I got in. So I started doing taking that course at 2000. So I graduated 2002. And yeah, so I was a full-time student at Capilano, and then 2002 rolled around and I graduated, and the industry kind of tanked at that point in Vancouver. I think actually across Canada there was just nothing coming up because we're primarily a service country when it comes to animation, that there was nothing happening. I had a few friends who got hired right away, and then myself, I ended up waiting another year working at Zellers. And to be totally frank, my portfolio that came out that 2002 wasn't the best. I'd say I was probably in the lower end of students that were graduating. So I spent that almost solid year humbly working at Zellers still, and trying to get a portfolio that was up to an industry standard. And then from there, boy, this is a sad story. One more as I'm going through it, but it gets better, guys.
somewhere along the line,
somewhere
right?
along the line, but stay with me. Like when at that time in the industry, especially in Vancouver, the one job you could definitely get was a Flash animator job. So I had a portfolio that had drawing skills that were passable, and they said Flash animation, and I was just wanting to get in, so I was like, yeah, great, start next week. So I spent about a week and a half learning how to do Flash, and I did it well enough for a time until they started giving me more complex scenes in Flash animation, and I just didn't have enough knowledge, practice, any kind of honestly, and I would say even in university, I wasn't an animator. I was definitely more of a designer or even storyboard artist. And I chose to ignore those things. So I just wanted to get into this business. But as a result of that, I got fucking shit canned.
That's a euphemism for saying let go.
Yeah, I got hired. I got fired. And that was rough. That was a real kick in the gut because it was just a reality check of no one is going to when you get into the industry, especially when you're starting out. There are not a lot of people that are like, okay, this kid's struggling. I'm gonna mentor him along because everybody else has got jobs, lives, their careers to worry about. So I was clearly struggling, and especially in television, there's tight deadlines. They just said, "I'm sorry, we're letting you go." And I said, "Oh, is that like a 2-week thing?" Or it's like, "No. If you could just pack up your desk now and leave."
Sounds pretty rough.
And that the fact that I wasn't like I don't belong in animation, it was just a wake up call of like you can't put your feet up no matter how secure you feel in your job. And I was feeling pretty good because I had a couple of decent little bits of animation, but as soon as they dropped something huge in my lap, I just crumbled. So it was just humbling and sort of like kind of humiliating in a way because you just sort of had to go back to this like my little desk and like I had toys up. Because I thought, well, this is it for me for about 6 to 8 months, and I had to put my toys in a box and walk out of the studio. So luckily, just based on that little bit of experience I got, I was able to get a couple of like sort of web illustration and animation things. It didn't require necessarily the best quality in terms of TV animation. It was just sort of like little web gigs, and that kept me going a little bit. And then eventually I landed a gig in Prince Edward Island, of all places, a place called Trapeze Animation. I'm not sure if it's still around, but so I packed up my stuff and I moved all the way back east for about 6 to 8 months, and I did flash animation there. And then that studio was sort of ramping down in terms of work, and I just applied. I took to AKA Cartoons, is where Ed and Eddy was being made, and they said we have a storyboard revisionist job, and I didn't actually want to be a storyboard artist because that's a lot of work, and it was something that I was like, well, you get to draw, but character design is what I want to do. I really want to do this. But they had the revisionist job open. It paid a little bit more, and I was just single and living on my own. So I went back to Vancouver, and I got introduced to the world of storyboarding. And storyboarding back then was on paper, like 3-panel sheets, and you had to do very accurate action notes at the bottom of your storyboard. So you would have to like write very accurate lowercase letters, very clear, because those boards were photocopied and sent overseas to be animated traditionally. And I did that for enough time to get some kind of handle on what storyboarding really was and what it meant. And then I applied for a job on George of the Jungle, like a flash animation series that was being done at Studio B, which was down the street from AKA Cartoons. So I did that, and that's when I started storyboarding professionally, which was, I think all told, that was like the first 5 years of the job. And then one storyboarding gig rolled into another storyboarding gig, but I really, really, really felt that I belonged being character designer or being a character designer. And so I decided that I would just go online and try to find anything that would be a character design post. And I did. I found one in Toronto. It was only for 3 or 4 months. And at that time, I was married and a kid. I had a kid. So we had a brand new baby. And but I was like, man, I feel like this is where I need to go. I need to do this character design job because one character design job will fall into another character design job. This is it. And so I packed up the family, and we moved to Toronto, and we did this one character design job. for a pilot episode at a place called Core Digital, which is no longer around. And that led into another character design job on Grossology, and that led into another character design job on Total Drama Island. And I came to the realization, holy shit, do I hate character design? Because I think it's really easy, especially in to think that character design is all concept sketches and very much like, really beautiful paintings. And that is probably the truth of the matter is that never happens. And if it does happen, it happens in the development phase on TV shows. And character design in TV animation is character rotations, mouth charts, pose sheets. It is very technical, laborious work. The people who do it and are able to bang it out are like just masters. And for me, I was just like, I'm not invested in any of this. I'm doing hand changes and we're all we're all designing digitally. So we're going through like huge mouth charts and we're changing mouth shapes. It's very, very, it just wasn't for me. But at that time, it's coming to Toronto for me was kind of an awakening in terms of art and being an artist, because in Vancouver, I mean, I don't know if I can't speak to it now, but back then we didn't have like a community of artists. I think it's partially because even the animation programs were built to get people into studios, and I feel in Toronto that's part of it, but also just with the amount of time you guys have and the training at Sheridan, it was like 4 years, you get a chance to sort of develop as artists yourself rather than artists. I don't know if that makes any sense. It's just sort of like you're able to draw, but you're able to figure out how you draw as an individual. So I would go into a bookstore called Labyrinth. Is that Labyrinth still around?
Yeah, it is.
Oh, that's great. And I would see books by just frankly kids or people coming out of school or people who are just sort of self-publishing the stuff, and I'm like, maybe I should try that. It's like, oh, and these guys have blogs. What are those websites? So that kicked me off into developing my own personal style while I was sort of doing character design. And when character design work would dry up, I would go back and I'd do board TV episodes for preschool shows like Max and Ruby. So then I sort of got to a point on the blogosphere. That's such a dated term now. Fuck. But I would get that I would sort of be able to get in contact with artists that wouldn't necessarily would give me a time of day. And through that, I was able to figure out there are places I want to work at, and what better place to sort of work in animation, but at a feature animation studio. And I was like, that would really, for me, that was kind of where I wanted to be. I wanted to be in Los Angeles, working on features. So I cold emailed the Pixar production designer through LinkedIn, and I sent him my stuff, my blog, and he got back to me. He said, "You have a phone number I can contact you at?" And through that, I called, which was like an hour and a half. He said, "Look, I was looking through your stuff, and I got to tell you, you're a story artist." And I was like, "Well, I've been storyboarding for years, but and he's like, "Oh no, I'm not saying storyboard. I'm saying story artist." And he's like, "There's a difference. You clearly have, just through your drawings, you tell stories." And he suggested this exercise where it's like, look, don't follow the rules of television that you've been doing for the last, at that point, almost 10 years. Try just writing and boarding something that you want to see. So I did. I sort of spent my evenings and weekends just boarding out this little sequence the guy with the big mustache on it with birds on. I think it's probably online somewhere. And that sequence I sent back to the guy at Pixar. He shopped it around to a couple of story people, heads of story. He said, nothing's really happening here at Pixar at the moment, but here I'm going to send you a few friends down in Los Angeles. And from there, I got a call from Sony Animation saying, hey, we've got this movie called Hotel Transylvania. We want you to talk to our director. The director was Gendy Tartakovsky at that point. So I got on Skype with him, and he liked me and I liked him, and I ended up boarding on Hotel Transylvania. That was my first feature story gig, and from there it was Book of Life, and there was one canceled movie in between that. A Planet 51 as well. I think that was Planet Earth 51, Planet 51, one of the ones. And then from there, I should mention, right after that Sony gig, I had the opportunity to do some freelance for DreamWorks Animation. That was my first contact with them, and it was going well until the movie that they were working on just went away. So I thought for sure that was going to be my time down, and I was like, oh, this is it. I'm gonna move down to LA. And they called me right after my second sequence with them and said, this movie's going to go into rewrites, so we don't have anything for you now. So I was up in Toronto, and it was good timing too, honestly. We just had our second kid, and it was, when you have a kid, it's sleepless nights and stuff. So it was probably for the best that we stayed in Toronto for like another year. And then shortly after Book of Life, I got a call from Pixar again saying, hey, how's it going? Send your portfolio down. And I did. And I flew down there and I met with them, and it was looking pretty good. But I was like, well, you know what? Since I had already worked with them, I'll send my portfolio to DreamWorks as well. And they called me back right away as well. And they said, hey, everyone really likes your stuff. And, what are you doing right now? I was like, nothing really. I was freelancing still, illustrating books, and he's like, it's too bad. I kind of just said it off the cuff, and I realized it was probably one of the smartest things I said. I'm like, it's too bad. I should have come and visit you guys when I was down in San Francisco being interviewed at Pixar. And the tenor of the conversation changed almost immediately. And you're like, wait a minute, you're being interviewed by Pixar currently? Yes. So it's like, okay, well, we'll get back to you pretty soon. Not even 24 hours, I had an offer from DreamWorks Animation to fly me and my family down and start working at the San Francisco campus. And that was 6 years ago.
Wow.
So that's
quite the story. There's so much happening in between in the last 10 years. Wow.
Yeah.
I do have a few questions coming out of that. One is you said you kind of learned what a storyboard or a story artist actually entailed, once you got into the industry. So maybe you can dispel some of the myths of,
Sure.
what students or what people think a storyboard artist is versus doing it.
Yeah, I mean, at the time, I think it's changed dramatically from my time at starting in television to my time in feature. Television, when I was working in it, was very much, you had to, it was very flat, because we're all working in like flash animation or Harmony, I think, and you would have to reuse backgrounds, and you couldn't really do like, dynamic shots a lot because that would cost money. It would mean new background, or say if you wanted to lock the camera on your character and have the background cycle backwards, that would mean like a whole pan. Like you couldn't really think like that. So all that sort of knowledge of cinema that you'd probably have bubbling around your brain because you work in animation kind of goes out the window when you're working in television animation. So yeah, it just was, storyboard was very much an instruction manual to keep the production going. And being a story artist is taking something like script pages or sometimes no pages, and elevate it, and just having a director going, we need the character to face his inner demons, and we don't know how to do that visually. Go ahead, go. And write the material yourself, which is a lot of my job at DreamWorks. So it is very much, it's just a different kind of thing where I don't know. I think it's changed in terms of technical ability, because I've seen a lot of great television portfolios where it looks like a feature now, and like they're posed out to like 1,000 panels. Some of these things I've seen, or like 2,000 panels, because every little like eye blink, every little gesture is thought out. But there's a little more of a cinema feel to some of the new stuff, and I think it's because a lot of it's 3D, or they're very much specific. They're streaming specific shows, so they have probably a little bit more of a budget. But it's coming to a point now where TV and film, I can't differentiate the two in terms of storyboards or story. But when I started out, and I sound so old when I say about it, when I started out, there was very much a different mentality to the two. And being a story artist meant showing in your boards a knowledge of cinema and a ability to write material.
Huh. Interesting. Yeah, so it sounds kind of like TV from what you were used to, was taking existing assets and just manipulating them to keep the new episodes going, I guess, versus movie productions, which were like more imaginative and from scratch.
And that it sounds very, very very sexy, but it's also like we get to points even in feature where we're like running towards a screening and everything's cut together, and we are doing very small fixes, and it gets very technical, then, but very much like I've been on productions when we have no art, nothing, and that's the most fun, where you are just trying to figure out the voice of the film.
Sounds great. The other thing I wanted to ask you about, because it sounds like cold outreaching to different people has really impacted your career over the years, especially with that called the Pixar. So can you go about, for somebody who hasn't done any cold outreaching or anything, can you go about giving some advice? How do you contact people? What do you say? Is LinkedIn the best way? Is finding their email, something like that?
I mean, it's hard. I think it's hard. I mean, I've had people throughout my career reach out to, and I think that, it's not to take it personally when people don't get back to you. It's just the nature. I mean, you are a stranger, and honestly, people just have busy lives. But the key is to be respectful, and just to introduce yourself and talk about what you want out of the conversation. Don't go looking for a job, or don't have. I mean, please don't have a script that you want to send them, or a idea for a TV show. These are people who are just artists like you, and they are trying to get their own stuff off the ground. If you go to them and you're looking for real advice about how to get into the business or what you can improve on, and I believe most people are receptive to that. So when you introduce yourself, if you're a student, just say that you're a student at such and such college or such and such university. Here's a link to my stuff. I'd appreciate some feedback, and that should be it. And if the feedback is given, and this is the most important thing, is to say thank you at the end, because I've talked to a few people, especially sort of just even in my where I work, and the thing that's the most disheartening is is when you give the feedback, and it might not be feedback you want to hear. You might not want to hear, hey, I think you really benefit from going to more life drawing, or hey, you know what, you should really study some films like this. And it just that things that will tell you that you're maybe not quite ready, that isn't meant to be mean. That's just meant to be truthful. Because we're not twirling our mustaches and going, "Well, I just don't want this person to apply." We're just saying, like, we stand shoulder to shoulder with a lot of really talented people, and like we see a lot of portfolios, and these are the things that you'll need to do in order to get through the recruiter and on one of our desks or somebody else's desks. So when you get that kind of feedback and they do take the time, just say thank you. And that goes a long way.
Sounds good. Yeah. Well, I was going to ask how should you respond after somebody takes the time to give you some feedback, but I guess the answer is just to say thank you.
Say thank you. And then, like, I mean, the most heartening thing is when you say thank you so much for the feedback, and if there is advice, the advice is taken, and you send them back material. Like that's just the beginning of a relationship with somebody, or an artist or a potential mentor. And I'd say just don't be pushy, and if they don't get back to you, don't follow up with like 15 emails. Just be patient. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. There are a lot of really talented people out there who like to teach or like just to help other artists out, because like the first half of this podcast, everyone struggles. Everyone wishes, like, I wish I had a mentor when I was struggling, when I first got my first job. Like, we all know what it's like. We all know how it feels. And we just, we all want that sort of comforting hand to go, you know what, you're doing okay. Here's what else you can do. You know what? Those things matter. And just being grateful and appreciative of those people when they do that to you is just, I mean, frankly, it's just good manners. If that's the one advice I can give, is just like, don't be pushy, and just be thankful when you do get that feedback.
Great. And so what is this role of social media in all this? Because that is something that, is a lot more up and coming than some other avenues of getting in touch with people. So when, a studio is looking at you or somebody's looking at your work, how much do they consider, how many followers you have, how many posts you have, what kind of work you have on there? How does social media scale in all this?
Social media, well, I mean, I'll say this for social media. Like, when I first started, I think I still have the account. That helped out a lot, just in sending people a very quick link to like my stuff, and also helped getting my first children's book gig, which I don't think we really talked about, but I can talk about a little bit now. Which is, I got contacted by a illustration agent who said, we saw your stuff, and how would you feel about being represented by us? And being a freelance artist, I would never say no to a gig, especially when you have like a kid or two. So that helped out a lot in getting launched into children's books. Social media now, I think, it has changed for good or bad. It's a very different animal. Like, for me, for Blogspot, you would get like 20, 30 comments. Some people would get 100, and you go, oh my. And now with hashtags and everything, like, you put the right hashtag on, you get 1,000 likes, and it's bolstering, and it definitely boosts your ego, but it doesn't mean as much as I think people think it means, and that includes followers to me as well. We have artists at the studio who are very good, but they have something like 30,000-40,000 followers, and they're trainees. Or they're junior artists. I think social media, especially for a professional, you think you have to be like it. You have to be a little bit on. It's not even being honest. It's being really transparent about who you are and what you do. And I know for a fact that we sometimes pull out our phones when we see portfolio, like flat card portfolios at the studio, and we'll pull out their Instagram account and flip through their stuff as well. And I think it's just important when you do that. I was saying to you earlier, like Instagram or Tumblr, or is that Tumblr still a thing? Who knows? Is a way of curating your life and curating who you are as an artist. And whatever you do on that Instagram page, and if people like me or a studio signs off on that, you better be that artist when you come to the studio. That's kind of it.
So don't be like posting amazing work on your Instagram account and then show up to work late and give some crap.
Well, exactly. I mean, like, because people can really present themselves as being super prolific and really, really competent and like constantly drawing. And then, you know, we get excited and we bring that person in, and then we can't find them at their desks because they're busy Instagramming. Or taking pictures of themselves outside, drawing at a cafe. I'm like, that's great. That's good. I was at a cafe this morning at 6 before work.
Yeah.
So I think it's just like, it is a great tool and you get a lot of eyes on your stuff. I think it's just about being as upfront when you get those jobs and when you get those opportunities, and just be that person that you are presenting to yourself on Instagram. And if you're not, then change it. Like, then, have that, if you want a lifestyle profile and, you can have all the wonderful magical things that, happen when you work in animation, great. But when you are presenting yourself as an artist working in a studio, that has to be you take a chance every time you bring a new artist in. Just make sure that you are that person.
Sounds good. That's good advice. So I'm thinking let's switch up this talk a little bit and talk a little bit about, once you actually land your first gig as a story artist or other professional at a studio, what are some of the skills and attitudes you need, to land that and also be successful in that role? Because I know you do a lot of things yourself to stay competitive technically, but what kind of, so there's like the technical skills, but also what kind of soft skills do you need to keep up on?
Well, soft skills, I mean, I'm still learning soft skills. But I think soft skills are just as important sometimes, not to be, I think, being really good at what you do and, being a good technical artist and being able to pitch in a room are all like things you need to do as a story artist. But soft skills, especially in feature, I'll just go on the day-to-day of what happens sort of at my office. And so let's say it's Monday and, I'll come in around 7. My work doesn't necessarily technically start at 9. Come in at 7 or 6, and I'll draw something for myself, and just get myself warmed up for the day. And oh, bye, hon. My wife's leaving me. Not permanently. She's just leaving. She's just leaving to go visit a friend. So I'll start the day just sort of getting, excited to draw again. And then let's say 9 o'clock, I'll meet with my director and we will get launched on a sequence. And depending on whether the sequence is something that you're excited about or something that you're like, like, I don't know how to do this. In the room is, I got launched on a sequence that was not too long ago that was daunting. Like, it was a massive sequence. In the room, don't let that show on your face. The director has a lot of things to worry about, and the last thing he wants to worry about is a story artist who can't deliver, a sequence in a number of weeks. So in that room, for that moment, take everything you take the direction you're given, and you go back to your office. And then if you want to freak out, you freak out, but close the door. And I don't think that should go away, by the way. I think if you are not, wondering how you can tackle a sequence um, every time you get one, then something's wrong. I think every sequence should be challenging. Not maybe it's not the most challenging on paper, but like how is it going to challenge you as an artist? Like, this is a very active is very much an acting driven moment in the film. So like, what kind of expressions can I do that aren't just like happy, sad, angry? Like how can I get the subtlety of that moment?
So what happens when you're presented with a sequence that you're not the biggest fan of? Like, how do you approach feedback in that sense?
Oh, when you get a sequence that, and sometimes the director will tell you very frankly, like, this sequence, I'm not the biggest fan of, but you could go and, I did this would never do this now, but like I used to do this very early on in my career. I'm like, well, I agree with you. Yeah, it's not working either. But I wouldn't present any solutions. When you're given a sequence that is clearly not working on the page, or even the director's saying it's not working, or, I don't know what to do with this, it's your job as a story artist, as a person who lives and breathes film and animation, to come up with a solution. And whether it's there on the spot, or whether it's, a day later, you take the material that you're given, and it's your job to elevate, not to sit there and shone it with everybody else. Your job is to take minor, small things, especially when you're running into a screening. There's an opportunity even there to like make that the best eye blink or the best open mouth you can you can make it. So, and like these days are long, these hours are can be long too, but like those are those, when you given those opportunities of like, when people are down in the room, that's your job. It's your job to be up in the room. That makes sense?
Yeah, it does. It sounds like that's part of, your role as a story artist is to take all those problems and turn them into solutions.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Are there any specific films or scripts or anything that you would recommend to get better at technical skills, or that have, or like help your creative thinking when you're trying to look for a solution? Like say you're stumped, do you turn to specific things to help?
Well, I think that, if that's something I cannot stress enough, especially if you want to get into storyboards, is that you have to watch movies all the time, all the time, all the time. You have to watch movies, movies you don't like, movies that don't work. God, I sat through Mortal Instruments, or is that the one with the rolling cities? Like this came
I
out
haven't.
not too long.
Yeah, I haven't seen
But
it yet.
I sat through it because I was just like, I gotta see what makes this movie not good. And it's very obvious, but like, but you just have to digest film, and if you do it enough, and if you watch enough, um, you know, there's the saying of like every story's been told. Like there's nothing new under the sun. Like when you're given presented a sequence, your mind will be popping up with moments from different films. Like a keyword will trigger you. Go watch those films. Go watch those moments in those movies. And like this is a really tense moment, and the character's sneaking around in the cave, and then like, well, what movies where there's like creepy things, crawling all around you? Well, there's the first King Kong, there's the Peter Jackson King Kong, there's Skull Island, there's a plethora of films that you can look at, or there's like the first Alien, or even the second Alien, of like wondering where that creature's going to jump out of. Like, how did that director build tension? What are the shots they use? And frankly, can you like that's your homework? You get to go watch movies. Like it's super cool. So yeah, it's just watching film. And honestly, like there's so much TV now that is just so cinematic too. I watched The Marvelous Miss Maisel. I don't know if have you heard that show?
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's on Netflix, right?
yeah, or it's on Amazon, and
So,
I watched it not too long ago, and there was just a brilliant transition from one location to another, and watched it like 3 times. I'm like, that's in the memory bank. I'm going to steal that shot one day. um, yeah, if they're just keep watching, and then in terms of reading material, like I just finished reading the Spider-Verse screenplay, um, which was really really interesting to read. I mean, it's almost beat for beat the movie, which leads me to believe it's probably a conform script. Conform scripts are what they do. They like scripts, especially in animation, are never permanent. So if a story artist comes out with a new line of dialogue, or a actor riffs on something in the record, scripts are immediately updated and conformed to that. So, but it was interesting to see, even in that script, moments as a story artist that I'm like, ooh, you could really open this moment up, or you could really like extend this, or because you would have screen direction like Spider-Man doing Spider-Man moments. That was the screen direction. I'm like, well, that could be anything. In terms of like, what can Spider-Man do? So it's really, if as an exercise, I would recommend like finding a movie that you really like. I have a book of the American character voices are so distinct, but
sorry, Colin, you just cut out for a second. You have a book?
The book of the screenplay, American Beauty. That's a really well written screenplay, but like, find a movie that you identify with. It doesn't have to be like any of the AFI top 100. Something that you really like. You could probably find the screenplay online as a PDF, or you could buy the screenplay, especially if it's a released movie, and grab a moment of that, grab a couple of pages, and try to board it without looking at the film. Just board it and see what you come up with. Because
that's a good exercise.
Because we're all storytellers and filmmakers, so like I don't know if you do this at school, but like sometimes I'll just like pop in a movie and kind of listen to it while I'm working, and maybe I'll go back and watch the movie or watch the sequence, and it was in my mind's eye, it was completely different from what was happening on screen. Even if I've seen the movie like 100 times, I'm like, oh, I kind of shot it differently in my head. I've done it a couple of times over my break, and it's a fun exercise, and it's just sort of fun to like see how you would shoot a moment if you were calling the shots.
Yeah. Well, you've given a lot of great advice on what it's like to be a story artist and reaching out to people. I'm wondering, as one last question, what specific advice would you have for students such as myself, or in this case, specifically students wanting to become a story artist? I know that, you've said a lot of things about technical and soft skills you need to have in reaching out and stuff. At this point in our careers, I guess, what would you say is the most important? Would you focus on?
Thinking about like, we did portfolio reviews like 4 or 5 months ago. But the thing is making your work, one thing definitely, make your work accessible. And what I mean by that is, if say you are applying to be a storyboard artist, however you set up your site, panels, some people like display their panels as like contact sheets. Just how the industry works is that we like being able to flip through your drawings, like as we're watching an animatic. Does that make sense? Like we're stepping through it. So single panel, single page kind of thing. When we get a flat portfolio, that's when we can see contact sheet, and we can run our eyes through the page. But when we're looking at something online, I know that there's the old thing about like page count on a portfolio. I think the digital is kind of shattered that, because a flat portfolio shouldn't be no more than 25 pages. But a digital portfolio, especially for story, should be like 2 sequences, and like 2 really good sequences. And I think the other thing to keep in mind is, we know you can read. We hope that you can read when you come into we know you can read a script and stuff like that. But I think what I look for when I look at portfolios anyways, I can't speak to everyone, but I look for creativity and voice, or that's job 1. I want I want to see innovation in the boards. And I want to see just sort of a very distinctive, funny or charming voice come through. So
can you give an example of what innovation? Oh, you're just going to say.
Yeah. I mean, and then you got to know your audience too. Like, if you're applying to a place like a Dreamworks, or even like Disney and stuff like that, you're probably not going to have guys with machine guns running around, and you're not. I don't think that those when we get like super action oriented game moments, it's not for me. I'm like, well, I mean, he should go work at Blizzard or like a game company. But if you're having a character discover their superpowers, or find a monster in a forest or something like that. I'm not saying do that, but I'm saying something that is definitely in the realm of what you kind of see in animation, and something that's sort of been a staple in animation, if that makes any sense. So do that. And then in terms of being an individual in the boards, I mean, that takes years, but we'd like to see the beginnings of that. And then sort of if you have done commercial work, that should be the end. So I'm going to change my statement. It's going to be 2 individual pieces, and then 1 if you have done commercial work, which a lot of people have, or they've done a sequence or 2 on a film, put that at the end.
Gotcha. Sounds good.
So, and then character sketches, life drawing, that stuff is the last thing we want to see. Not the last thing we want to feel like that's the last thing we want to see. It's just the last thing that we want to see. It's not the thing that you put forward. If you're a story artist, then it should be very much a story-based portfolio, and then we can look at the technical skills at the back.
Gotcha. Well, yeah. If you have anything else to say, I think that's a wrap at this point.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Colin. I really do appreciate you taking your time to come on the podcast.
No problem.
Now, just before we leave, I want to share how to get in touch with Colin if you have more questions or want to see his work. And that is by following him on Instagram at instagram.com/Colin Jack Stories. And I'll put that in the description of this podcast as well. And that's all for now. Okay, bye.